Hi. You're studied out in Albert Lee. Can you tell us a little bit about the demographics of the people that you work with? I have a friend who's a principal down there in an elementary school, and they have a lot of transient workers coming through, and what you described is completely opposite of what she talks about with the health and welfare of those people that come through the schools.
The demographics of Albert Lee is your question?
That you worked with.
That we work with. Well, the Blue Zones project work that we do in Albert Lee is open to the entire community, and so anybody who lives there is welcome to participate. We have no specific things that we do to target any one group within a community, but really just exposing it to the whole area. One of the reasons that Albert Lee was chosen is because statistically it's such an average city. It represents kind of a demographic of middle America. And it's also kind of a very contained community. So you're right, there is quite a bit of diversity, but at the same time it represents what's happening in other cities as well. And so we saw participation across the board from the demographic, not just from a younger generation or older generation from one ethnic group to another, but really truly across the board. And really that's what is reflected in our statistics. Now, interestingly enough, we just went back out to refresh our work with Albert Lee within the last few months. And so we have been refreshing all of the original programs that we did. We found that about 60% of the MOIs that we formed 5 years ago are still intact. And the restaurants are still in line with the programs that we had laid out for them. The faith-based communities in Albert Lee are particularly strong, and that also lends to a lot of participation.
Just a question about hours of sleep. I would guess that people have different, average times, and it makes the most sense to go to sleep when you're tired. I'm just wondering if 8 hours is fairly important.
I think sleep is a big part of decompressing. What we do find in the Blue Zones are people taking the time to take regular naps during the day. And just the ability to downshift and decompress really helps to minimize the inflammation that can cause a lot of chronic illness, or at the root of a lot of chronic illnesses. So if it's sleeping, if it's napping, if it's doing other things just to decompress, that seems to be a common thread in a lot of the studies that we've done. Okay.
The average age, I would say, really is closer into the 60s, 70s. I think it's like 75 is about the average age. There is a greater awareness, so that's one of the things that you're hearing a lot more about is the people with early onset, and of course those are devastating stories. So I think as we've raised that level of awareness and bringing that up, that it is more people are conscious of that. There is a rare form of the hereditary form of the disease where that is definitely early onset. And most Alzheimer's, I think before I started, all think it's hereditary. It's not. In fact, the hereditary forms are very rare, but those are often the most common ones that come with the early onset. Alzheimer's, I would say, is kind of like heart disease. It can run in a family, and you have a tendency for it. So if you have multiple generations that have had the disease, yes, your risk is greater, but that doesn't mean you have to get it.
So what keeps the population of these Blue Zone cities stable, in particular the Loma Linda, California? Why aren't all Americans rushing to live there?
These communities, you see the 3 generations living under one roof, and coming back into that community. We don't see a lot of the younger people moving away, for instance, in Ikaria or Sardinia. They're staying within those communities and continuing with the work that their parents did and that their grandparents did and so on. Loma Linda, California is a concentration of Seventh-day Adventists, which again is kind of a insulated group, and they tend to not move away. And point, people moving in, that does happen, but not at kind of within these insulated communities, not at the rate that we would see in others. They don't included.
Hi, this I think is for Dave, but maybe for Gwen too. The book that Dan Buettner wrote about the people who live longer and live in these places are much happier. And I think that was the book Thrive. I wonder if you could address that just briefly, because I think the attitude and the feeling about life correlates with the better health.
Yeah, actually I found that a very fascinating book to read. And a lot of the happiness is also kind of the culture that you live in, because society's got certain expectations that you grow up into. But you're going to see a diversity of different environments where people are happy, all the way from Singapore, which is a very driven economy. People are very career focused there, but there's a lot less freedom there, but so people are feeling safer there. And then you can go to places there's a town in Mexico where people are actually quite happy. And you would say, well, why Mexico? And they're poor there, and they've got maybe a lot of police corruption there. But part that happens with the police corruption, that gives them something to be sarcastic about, a sense of humor about, that helps them kind of shed some of that stress and makes them happier. So there's different causes and reasons that contribute to things, and a lot of it has to be the society and the communities that we work in. Things like that happen in Singapore, we couldn't do here in the U.S. because we're based on freedom here. And so we give up a certain amount of security because of that freedom here.
I think another observation on that is the areas that we're talking about, the happiest areas or the longest lived areas, are all relatively simple lifestyles. And so there's not a blue zone in Beverly Hills or Manhattan. And so it's not that money or complex lifestyles equal happiness. It's really simplifying and downshifting, decompressing, and having a very strong social network that seem to be the common correlators there.
Gwen, when you implemented this at Salo, you obviously had some expectations for improved employee morale and health and wellness and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
What was one of the more surprising results that you saw? Something perhaps that you didn't expect that was revealed after the implementation?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, with all the corporations we work with, there's a continuum. There's companies who've never invested in employee well-being or their corporate culture. And then there's companies doing some really cool thought leader things already. And so when we start working with a company, we go out and do an assessment, and we meet that company where they are, and then we build on top of that to bring them to a new level. Salo, in and of themselves, is already a thought leader in a lot of ways, the way that they have their corporate structure and corporate culture invested in. And so something that was surprising for me was our employee happiness, our employee engagement score. Our first score off of the assessments that we had done was, I think it was like a B or a B plus, or let's just say it was a B. And so I was thinking, you know, for this big of a group of people, that's pretty good. I mean, that's a pretty good score. And I was thinking, check mark, we're not going to look at that one. Well, sure enough, at the end of the program, we moved up into the A plus range. And so even already being a pretty high-performing, happy, engaged group, there was still room to move and still room to make that team feel even more engaged and have a higher sense of well-being. So that was a surprising thing coming out of that.
Dave talked about the importance of faith-based, out in California with the Adventists. Mm-hmm. So for Gwen, have you thought about engaging more within the faith communities, within churches, to expand your program, the Blue Zones, especially with mega churches, perhaps?
Absolutely. When we go into a community, I'll talk about Fort Worth. Fort Worth is a community we're just launching in right now. We launched there about a month or so ago. It's 4 times larger than Minneapolis, an extremely diverse demographic that we're working with there. When we go into a population, we engage all of the community leaders. So if it's corporate community leaders, restaurateurs, we talk to faith-based communities, schools, the Bureau of Commerce, what am I trying to say? Chamber of Commerce, I was going to say Bureau of Commerce. At any rate, we engage all of those. The faith-based communities is one of our strongest links that we have to the population. It's a great way to address people all in one area and one group, and it really ties into a lot of common correlations that they're already practicing anyway. And so definitely a very strong part of our overall programming. But then there's other sectors that we get into too, if it's schools or businesses and et cetera, because it's not all in one. But the faith-based is definitely very strong advocates with us.
Dave, you had mentioned that there was a decreased incidence of dementia in some of the blue zones. And is that true for all the blue zones, including Loma Linda?
Yes. And a lot of it has to do with the lifestyle that people are living there, and whether it's a number of these other chronic diseases or dementia. Yes.
Thank you.
I think I wanted to mention, we've gotten that question, I got it before when we were doing some networking. On one hand, from Alzheimer's not being a preventable disease, but yet in these blue zones, we really find almost no dementia. And so what's the connection there? And really, Dave's talk really went into a lot of the foods and the anti-inflammatory vegetables and beverages and things that they eat on a regular basis that keep that inflammation down. I wonder if that's not a common thread within that. We don't know the answer, but there seems to be some sort of a correlation. I think so too.
So thank you. Could we have another round of applause for our wonderful speakers? Fascinating topic, and I hope you learned something. I know I did, and we just really appreciate your time and sharing this, all three of you. Great speakers, and so happy to have you here today. So it is time to announce the winner of our drawing. So we do want someone who's here. So is Susan McKenna able to be here today? Oh, her representative. Well, just as good. So the Blue Zone Solution, I will get that to you, Heather, afterwards. I believe Heather. I know her. So I would believe any of you as well. So I just want to also, in closing, I want to have you save the date. If you're interested in our next series program, it's October 23rd. It will be on the future of medicine. There should be a postcard on your table if you want to take that with you. At that session, we'll examine some of the radical and also evolutionary changes that could change every aspect of your personal experience that is our health care. So from exploding consumer health management apps to surgical robots, telemedicine, and more, we will look at that and maybe ask, what's the future of the physician? So please come learn more about these topics at our October session. You won't want to miss it, and we're always looking for ideas for new topics as well as nonprofit recipients. And if you wanted to talk to us about that, you can go to our website at nuger.com and get the phone numbers for myself or Christine Leckitz. And again, thanks for coming today.